Imagine you are standing in front of this massive, incredibly complex control board.
Right.
It's just covered in thousands of wires and blinking lights and intricate
It's
switches.
like the nerve center of a massive facility.
Yeah, exactly. And this board, it represents an entire functioning society. So imagine watching a very specific, highly resourced group of people slowly and, deliberately pulling the plugs out of that board one by one.
Just dismantling it.
Right. But they aren't trying to destroy the board out of malice. They're just quietly rerouting the power to their own personal tiny control panels.
Oh, I see.
But as they do this, the main board starts to spark. Then it begins to smoke. And, well, eventually the entire room goes completely dark.
It's a very vivid image because, once that main room loses power, those tiny isolated control panels aren't going to stay lit for very long on their own.
Exactly.
They're essentially just borrowing time from a collapsing system.
Welcome in, everyone. Today's mission is to take a deep dive into a really fascinating source text that details a concept called false self-preservation, specifically looking at Haiti's elites.
It's a heavy topic, for sure.
It is. We are going to look at how a society physically and socially unplugs from the concept of community. Why should you care? Because we're analyzing what actually happens when the wealthiest members of society try to, buy their way out of a systemic collapse.
Right.
And it's worth noting right up front, we aren't here to play politics or take sides regarding Haiti's government or its factions.
Mm-hmm.
We're just putting this specific author's theory under the microscope. We want to see how the mechanics of societal breakdown actually function on a day-to-day level.
Yeah, and this text is really a masterclass in understanding the anatomy of systemic failure. Because the central premise the author presents is that a nation's decline doesn't happen in one sudden cataclysmic event.
It's not like a movie where everything blows up at once.
Exactly. No, it happens decision by decision. It's the slow, daily accumulation of choices that prioritize the individual over the collective. And the most compelling part of this argument is that you can actually see these decisions materialized in the physical infrastructure around us.
The actual buildings.
Yes. The mindset literally builds the environment.
The mindset builds the environment. I got to say, that is such a powerful lens to look through. So let's start from the ground up, literally.
Let's do it.
What psychological shift makes someone look at a centuries-old sustainable model of living and say, no, I think I want to build a concrete fortress instead? The source text spends a lot of time contrasting the architectural past and present in Haiti to illustrate this, right?
Yeah, it really does. If we look at the historical precedent described in the text, homes in Haiti were traditionally very simple one-story structures. They were primarily constructed from wood or brick.
Right.
And they featured very low fences, and in a lot of cases, no fences at all.
So they were integrated into the neighborhood rather than walled off from it.
Precisely. And those simple structures lasted for centuries. But the crucial detail the author highlights is the historical respect for public space.
Oh, the sidewalks.
Yes. Homeowners would deliberately leave at least 1 meter of space between their property line and the street, specifically for sidewalks.
Wow.
There was this physical built-in acknowledgement of the public right-of-way, which, created a buffer zone that fostered a sense of shared community.
But the text notes that modern, wealthy homeowners are taking the exact opposite approach today. They aren't building those integrated wood or brick homes anymore.
Not at all.
They are constructing massive fortress-like walls using heavy reinforcement with metal and rebar. But they are completely skipping basic engineering protocols.
Yeah, things like soil and foundation inspections are just totally ignored.
Which is wild. I mean, that lack of inspection is an engineering nightmare on its own.
It really is, but the materials they're using actually compound the disaster. They're building incredibly heavy concrete structures on foundations that were just never designed to hold that kind of weight.
Okay, let's unpack this. They are building these heavy fortresses, but instead of using proper industrial materials, they are using substandard cinder blocks.
Right.
The text specifies these blocks are mixed with way too little cement, and instead of a proper aggregate, builders are using local beach sand. I mean, why would a wealthy person who is actively trying to build a safe fortress use salty beach sand?
Well, it reveals a fascinating breakdown in the broader system. When a nation's infrastructure and supply chains deteriorate, proper construction materials simply cannot reach the people who need them.
No matter how rich they are.
Exactly. Money cannot buy immunity from a fundamentally broken supply chain. So even the elites are forced to rely on locally sourced, compromised materials like that beach sand.
Wow.
And from a structural standpoint, salt is the absolute enemy of concrete and rebar.
Yeah, the text highlights that this salt immediately eats away at the paint, and even worse, it causes the walls to literally degrade and crumble when it rains. I mean, it's like playing a high-stakes game of Jenga, but you're making the blocks out of salt and sand.
That's a great way to put it.
How can someone sleep soundly inside a heavy concrete compound, knowing the walls are dissolving around them?
What's fascinating here is the psychological coping mechanism at play. The author defines this as a drive for spatial dominance.
Spatial dominance.
Yeah. It is the illusion that if I can control the physical footprint of my property to the absolute inch, I'm in control of my fate. It's a mental trade-off.
I see.
They are sacrificing actual long-term physical proper materials and solid foundations in exchange for the immediate short-term feeling of dominating their immediate environment. A giant wall feels safe, even if the structural math says it's basically a death trap.
That perfectly explains the zoning violations the text brings up, too. Because they aren't just building walls, right?
Yeah.
They are stacking 4 or more floors on top of weak, single-story foundations.
And repurposing the wrong materials to do it. Yeah.
Right. The text points out they're using inadequate rebar-like steel that's meant only for concrete flooring, and they're using it for vertical structural support in these multi-story buildings.
It's a complete disregard for physics in the pursuit of maximizing personal space.
And that historical 1-meter sidewalk is completely gone now. They build right up to the street line, leaving absolutely zero space for pedestrians or parking.
None at all.
They're expanding their private footprint at the total expense of the public space. That has to create incredible physical friction in the city. You push pedestrians into traffic, you eliminate the buffer zone, and you just choke the streets.
It directly intercepts national progress. And this wasn't something the government just ignored. The text details how the late President René Préval actually attempted to fix this creeping chaos.
Okay.
His administration's vision was to ask residents to simply respect the legal property setbacks.
It sounds like a pretty basic civic improvement plan, honestly. Just reclaim that 1 meter so the government can build sidewalks, plant trees, install public lighting, and actually, govern the space.
It was a very pragmatic plan, but it hit a massive coordinated roadblock in an affluent area called Turgeot.
Right, the Turgeot resistance.
Exactly. The wealthy homeowners there didn't just file complaints. The text states they physically blocked the government workers from operating.
Wow.
They actively resisted the initiative to the point where the entire project had to be abandoned.
Okay, wait. I'm stuck on the sidewalk thing. The text connects this resistance in Turgeot directly to armed gangs taking over neighborhoods.
Yes.
How does a rich guy fiercely protecting an illegal front yard boundary lead to armed gangs taking over a ravine? That feels like a massive leap to me.
It sounds like a leap until you look at the mechanics of how the rule of law operates.
Okay, break that down for me.
The author explains that the government had a two-phased approach to stabilizing the city. Beyond the affluent streets, there were massive informal settlements being built dangerously close to ravines.
Right.
The government urgently needed those residents to comply with safety regulations to prevent a massive humanitarian disaster.
But you can't tell the poorest citizens to follow strict zoning laws if the richest citizens are just openly flouting them.
Exactly the issue. To force compliance from the vulnerable people in the ravines, the government first had to demonstrate optical fairness. That was phase 1.
Ah. So the wealthy property owners on the main streets had to follow the law first.
Yes, they had to give up their illegal encroachments and allow the sidewalks to be built. By physically blocking the work in Turgeot, the elites effectively killed phase 1.
And by killing phase 1, they completely destroyed the government's moral and legal authority to enforce phase 2 in the ravines.
That is the tragic domino effect. Because the government lost the authority to clear the ravines, those chaotic, poorly built neighborhoods went entirely unchecked.
Oh, wow.
And without the rule of law, they became unpalatable, and armed gangs eventually took them over.
Wait, so by fiercely protecting an illegal front yard boundary, they essentially handed the keys of the entire neighborhood over to armed gangs?
Effectively, yes. The direct consequence of the elites refusing to yield a few feet of yard space is that they can now no longer safely approach their own cherished homes.
The text makes a really poignant note here, betting that these same homeowners would gladly follow the sidewalk laws today, like they would gladly tear down their own walls, if it just meant they could return to those houses safely.
It is the ultimate backfire of spatial dominance. When the elite actively sabotage the social contract for their own immediate gain, the resulting chaos doesn't just politely stop at their property line.
Right. It spreads.
The failure to build a sidewalk in Turgeot wasn't just about pedestrian convenience. It was a fundamental failure to establish state authority.
It's like an autoimmune disease. The body's defense mechanisms, in this case, the elites securing their own private infrastructure and fiercely protecting their borders, are actively attacking the healthy cells of the public systems.
That's a really apt comparison.
And they keep attacking until the whole body begins to shut down. And according to the text, this autoimmune response didn't just stop at the property line. The elites applied this exact same strategy of isolation to every single sector of society.
Yes. The author lays this out as a persistent, deeply ingrained reflex to bypass a broken system rather than utilizing their leverage to actually fix it.
Here's where it gets really interesting, because the text traces this escalation, and it is just a staggering arms race of avoidance. It's like bailing water out of your cabin on a sinking ship instead of just helping to patch the hole.
Exactly. Let's look at vehicles and violence as an example.
Yeah.
As crime began rising and people were being murdered in the streets, the professional class doctors, engineers, politicians, they stayed completely silent.
Instead of demanding accountability or investing in public safety, they simply changed their mode of transport.
Right. The text notes a shift from standard luxury sedans like a Mercedes or BMW to heavy-duty SUVs like G-Wagons and Range Rovers.
The mobile equivalent of the concrete fortress. But a G-Wagon doesn't solve crime, it just changes the target.
Exactly.
The text shows how the threats evolved in tandem with the armor. When robbers started using revolvers and pistols, the wealthy didn't push for gun control or police reform. They just added ballistic glass and armor plating to their vehicles.
Which naturally prompted the criminals to escalate. Rifles emerged on the streets, specifically targeting these wealthy individuals, and the response, just add even heavier armor to the cars.
But they hit the limits of physics eventually. You cannot out-armor a collapsing state forever.
You really can't.
The text states that armor-piercing rounds have now appeared on the streets. At this point, the elites have entirely run out of mechanical solutions. I mean, a civilian vehicle, no matter how expensive, cannot withstand military-grade munitions.
This is the ceiling of their avoidance strategy. The chaos has finally evolved past their ability to purchase immunity from it. And, the text points out the political layer to this as well.
Oh, right, the politicians.
Instead of holding leaders accountable to stop the violence, many elites simply invested in politicians who would award them lucrative, no-bid contracts. They utilized the political system purely for personal enrichment, while entirely circumventing their civic duty to maintain the state.
And this mentality applies to the physical infrastructure, too. The text asks a very blunt question. What happens when the public bridges wash away?
And the answer is pretty grim.
Yeah. The answer is that the elites simply do not care about rebuilding a public bridge, as long as their own private fleet of fuel trucks can still manage to ford the rivers to reach the provinces.
The mechanism of leverage is crucial here. Think about healthcare.
Okay.
When the public hospitals begin to collapse from underfunding, the elites don't leverage their wealth and influence to demand better public health policies. They just transition to private hospitals.
But the isolation continues. What happens when civil war makes even the private hospitals inaccessible?
Right, because that happened.
Yeah, the text says they just charter a helicopter or an airplane and fly out to another country for medical care.
And the tragic part is, when the wealthiest 1% stop relying on the public hospital, that hospital doesn't just lose its most lucrative patients.
What else does it lose?
It loses the only people in the society with enough political and financial leverage to force the government to keep it functioning. The local healthcare system's failure no longer affects the elite physically, so it is just allowed to die.
That is so dark. But that makes perfect sense. And it's the exact same story with the power grid, right? There is no reliable electricity for the masses. So the elite bypass the public grid entirely by importing their own private generators and fuel.
But again, the collapsing environment pushes back. The text notes that when nationwide fuel blockades began, making it impossible to run those imported generators, the elites didn't use their influence to resolve the blockades or stabilize the nation's fuel supply.
No, they just pivoted to solar panels and heavy-duty batteries. They found another technical workaround to avoid fixing the root problem.
Education follows the same grim trajectory, unfortunately.
Oh, right.
When public schools fail, their children attend expensive private institutions. When armed gangs threaten those private schools, making them unsafe to attend, they don't fight to secure the neighborhoods. They just ship their children overseas to study and live.
And we see it in telecommunications, too. When the local telecom networks crash and burn, they simply buy satellite internet, satellite TV, and satellite phones. They have successfully severed every single tie to the nation's infrastructure.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, this is the core thesis of the author's argument and the true definition of false self-preservation.
False self-preservation.
Yes. By totally isolating themselves with their armored cars, solar panels, satellite links, and overseas education, they haven't actually preserved themselves at all. They've engineered a trap.
Because they have run out of track. The armor-piercing rounds, the blocked fuel trucks, the crumbling concrete fortresses, it all points to a dead end.
Precisely. The text argues that the era of workarounds is basically over. The societal breakdown has become so pervasive, so heavily armed, and so structurally deep that money can no longer serve as a shield.
Wow.
The author concludes that these elites now face a stark binary choice. They must either finally engage in the messy, difficult work of fixing the systemic rot, or they must physically flee the very chaos their withdrawal helped create.
So what does this all mean? We've traced how a breakdown in community responsibility didn't start with a massive explosion, but with something as mundane as salty cinder blocks and missing sidewalks.
Yeah.
And we watched that mindset escalate into an absurd, ultimately futile arms race of armored G-Wagons, private helicopters, and satellite internet.
The synthesis of this source material leaves us with a really profound lesson on the limits of individualism. Isolation is just not a sustainable survival strategy for any ruling class.
Right.
They must allow competent, civic-minded people to lead real change, or they will suffer the ultimate consequences of their own isolation.
And the text touches on the politicians' roles in this too, right?
Yeah. It briefly hints that the author's next focus will be on the politicians themselves, specifically those who accept bullying and prioritize their own personal power over the stability of the nation, which is a completely natural continuation of this exact same self-seething behavior we've been analyzing today.
It all comes back to pulling the plugs on that main control board. Before we wrap up, I want to leave you, the listener, with a final, lingering question to ponder on your own. It's something that wasn't explicitly spelled out in the text, but it is the logical endpoint of everything we've just explored.
This raises an important question. I'm really curious to hear where you take it.
If a society's leaders and its wealthiest elites completely decouple their own day-to-day survival from the survival of the masses, if they have their own private power grids, their own imported water, their own overseas schools, and they travel on their own heavily armored roads, does the concept of a shared nation even exist anymore? Or is it just a geographical location occupied by two entirely separate realities waiting to collide?
That cuts right to the heart of what truly binds a country together. It requires more than just borders on a map. It requires a shared reliance on a common system.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive into the mechanics of societal infrastructure and the true cost of false self-preservation. Keep questioning the world around you, keep looking for the mechanisms behind the headlines, and we will catch you on the next one.